Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin. It's almost 4 years ago to the day that we began this program, this long-form interview program. I remember having a wonderful meeting with Mr. Murdoch and Suzanne Scott and others about what is it that I would do on Fox. I wasn't looking for a TV show. I've got plenty to do, but they couldn't have been nicer. And they suggested that, well, why don't you do something? So we talked about what I wanted to do, and what I wanted to do was something that really wasn't experimental, but I wanted to bring it back, called a long-form interview. I personally like interviews where the guest is really a special guest. Maybe the guest is known, maybe the guest is not known, but where you have time to delve in. And that's really been the nature and the substance of this program the last 4 years, Life, Liberty, and Levin, the long-form interview program. I've also wanted to do a show, I've certainly thought about it, about books. Now, I understand it doesn't sound as glitzy as it could be, but we have some tremendous authors out there with tremendous minds. Some of them are investigators and so forth. And it's very difficult to cover that and cover news and cover Washington just once a week. And so my own thinking has been, what about a long-form interview for authors? So what I've decided to do tonight is to fuse the two. We have a fantastic guest who's a fantastic author who's done some incredible cutting-edge investigation about the power of communist China in this country. Revelations that I knew nothing about. I sat down with this book and I finished it in really a day and a half. And I don't spend a lot of time reading everybody else's books. I read history, I read economics, and that sort of thing. But Peter Schweizer's book, in his book Red-Handed, is a crucially important book right now. How American elites got rich helping China win, and they're still doing it. Peter Schweizer, how are you, my friend?
I'm great. Terrific to be on with you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Well, the book is absolutely unbelievable. And you're with the Government Accountability Institute. You're the president. And you've spent a lot of time as a journalist, as an investigator. You have a whole team looking at things. And I want to cut right to the chase and go right into this book, which is why I've decided not to do a monologue. Let's actually begin with chapter 4, where you talk about Silicon Valley and this big meeting that takes place among all these titans and these robber barons of Silicon Valley and the communist Chinese leader Xi, and take it from there, please.
Yeah, President Xi comes to the United States to meet with President Barack Obama, but instead of seeing the president first, he stops in Seattle and has a powwow with the biggest tech executives in the United States. All the big names are there. Tim Cook from Apple. It's being held at Bill Gates' house, and they're starstruck. In fact, when President Xi enters the room, Tim Cook turns to his colleagues and says, "Did you feel the earth move?" And this is really the beginning of a courtship between Xi, the communist regime in China, and the biggest names in tech. Bill Gates, you look at Mark Zuckerberg. These are all individuals that have deep ties with communist China, and they're supportive of their policies. And these ties actually enhance the military and intelligence capabilities of China, which is now positioning itself to surpass the United States. That's their goal.
Well, let's talk about these high-tech robber barons. Why do you think they're so taken by a genocidal communist dictator like this? Isn't that odd to you? I mean, the old Soviet Union, I don't remember American corporations saddling up to Brezhnev and so forth. As a matter of fact, if you had done something like that, or you received business from the old Soviet Union, you'd be persona non grata. Here, it's in the open. They embrace this man. What do you think the mentality is?
Well, it's interesting. You look at a guy like Bill Gates, who's worth, $100 billion or more. Is it really about the money? It might be. Honestly, I think it has more to do with the attraction to dictatorship that a lot of these executives have in Silicon Valley. So a guy like Bill Gates, for example, with Microsoft, Microsoft does major research in China with military-linked labs in artificial intelligence, which is a crucial area that China says They're going to surpass the United States so they can achieve technological superiority. Microsoft accepts interns from the People's Liberation Army. Bill Gates himself has invested in Chinese companies that are doing military technological research with the United States. And to cap it all off, Bill Gates is an advisor to the Chinese government. He's been given membership in something called the Chinese Academy of Engineering. It sounds great, but it's actually a Chinese Communist Party run organization whose charter requires members to be, politically approved, and their responsibility is to advise the Chinese government on technical matters. Bill Gates doesn't need the money. Why is he doing that? I think there's an attraction to the fact that in China, things get done efficiently because you've got a brutal dictatorship imposing its will on people.
And in many ways, these corporatists, that's their own mentality, right? I mean, even though you have shareholders and you have shareholder meetings and you have a board of directors really selected by the chairman and the CEO, they muscle through these shareholder meetings. They don't really reveal everything they're supposed to reveal. We call them publicly held companies, but what do we really know? We invest in a mutual fund, we have an IRA or a 401k, and we don't know what the hell Microsoft or Apple's doing with the communist Chinese. And speaking of Apple and Tim Cook, what is that relationship like with the communist Chinese government?
Well, there have been revelations about the fact that Apple has set up sweetheart deals with China in terms of supplier relationships. Tim Cook, I talk about this in the book, jokes around with Communist Party officials that are censoring content in China. You look at a guy like Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg went to the state dinner that Barack Obama held for President Xi. At that dinner, Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, goes up to Xi and says, "My wife is about to give birth to a child. Would you name that child?" Literally, that's what Mark Zuckerberg asked. Xi sort of chuckled and said, "No, that's too great a responsibility." In another situation, the top propaganda official for the Chinese Communist Party visits Facebook headquarters. Mark Zuckerberg gives him the tour. They go back to Zuckerberg's office. The Chinese Communist Party official sits in his chair and notices a thick book sitting on his desk. It's the collected writings and speeches of President Xi of China. The propagandist asks Mark Zuckerberg, "What's this book doing here?" And Mark Zuckerberg literally tells him, "Well, I've been reading it and I bought copies for the senior executives in our company so we can better understand socialism with Chinese characteristics." It's remarkable the way in which they suck up to them and the literal help that they provide in aiding and abetting this brutal regime.
I think this generation of corporatists, Peter, is quite different than the generation of corporate titans in the past, who really put a lot of muscle and smarts into building our economic system, our economic foundation, whether it's steel, whether it's oil and so forth. They were virulently pro-American patriots, World War I, World War II. They did everything they could to support the American people. Or when a president sat down with them and said, "Look, we need your help on something," even the turn of the last century, McKinley calls in Mellon and Carnegie and some of the others. The federal government is broke, and they lend the federal government money, the predecessor to the Federal Reserve and so forth. I don't see that today. I see these guys with lobbyists looking for every advantage they can possibly get. I see these guys coddling up to a genocidal, mass-murdering dictator while they're trashing Donald Trump and the Republican Party as some kind of socially backwards entities. There's something terribly wrong with these young people, become middle-aged people, obviously, and run these corporations. Did you find that as well?
No, I think you're spot on, Mark. I mean, that's part of the problem. They're kind of unmoored, disconnected from American life. And of course, these are, in the economic sense, the biggest winners in America. I mean, they should be the biggest cheerleaders for a representative form of government, limited government, rule by law, limited regulations, but they're not. And they seem happy to perform these services that benefit the Chinese government. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, for example, teamed up with Google, and they said, "We're going to attach this large data cable and we're going to link Hong Kong with San Francisco." and they start building it. And they hire a Chinese company linked to the Chinese military to do it. The only reason this project was not completed was the Justice Department and the FBI stepped in and said, no, you cannot complete this project because it would provide unprecedented, in their words, opportunities for Chinese espionage. Now, Mark Zuckerberg and the people at Facebook and Google know that. These are very, very smart people. What would prompt them to think it was okay in the name of a dollar, in the name of building their corporation, to provide this benefit to the Chinese government is beyond me. And you're right, a generation earlier, you would not have seen corporate executives willing to do something like that.
And also look at their own conduct. Facebook, you talk about Zuckerberg and the internet and so forth. They don't tolerate different opinions. They don't even tolerate experts coming on their sites, talking about vaccines. They don't tolerate intelligent, substantive disagreements with what this administration is doing, or Fauci, or anything of the sort. They're picking up some very, very bad habits from communist China and the way that regime is ruled. Don't you think?
Yeah, that's a crucial point, Mark, because here's the thing. The argument has been made by Silicon Valley and Wall Street and others that if we have this commerce with communist China, our values are going to rub off on them. Well, that certainly hasn't happened. What has happened, however, is Chinese Communist Party values have rubbed off on them. And so you find Microsoft, you find Facebook, you find Google executives making excuses for Chinese censorship, pretending it's not occurring, or sort of saying, oh, it's not that big a deal, when in fact they're starting and have been doing the same thing here in the United States. So you see this merging in the tech space. We have this technological World Wide Web that sort of exists, that sort of links everything together. The censorship approach and attitude that Beijing has perfected over the course of the last 15 years or so is now being imported into the United States, and it's not being done by the American government. It's being done by these tech giants, and it ought to frighten anybody who's concerned about freedom of speech.
Well, we have created these oligopolies within the United States, which are almost to a company led by leftists who support the Democrat Party, and the Democrat Party supports them and protects them. And these oligopolists, while crushing American freedom and different ideas and speech, tend to be working with these autocratic regimes, China and anybody else they can work. They'd love to work with Iran. They'd love to work with all these countries. They don't much care. This is a big problem. This isn't about free market capitalism. This has nothing to do with free market capitalism. They work the system. And the more centralized it is, the more power they have, given how much resources they have. When we come back, Peter, unbelievable book, Red Handed. I want to talk to you about the Bidens. That mess, that spectacle. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Well, let's jump right into this. The Biden family. Joe Biden's been in government forever. Let me ask you a question on this, Peter Schweitzer. Did the communist Chinese regime make it part of their mission to invest in the Biden family, knowing full well that Joe Biden was a longtime career politician with lots of influence?
I think there's no question, Mark. And look, we spent more than a year investigating red-handed, and one of the most startling things we uncovered is the simple fact that the Biden family, while he was vice president of the United States and continuing when he became president, received some $31 million from Chinese individuals who are linked to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence.
$31 million. Whoa.
Yep, $31 million. And these deals, which we lay out in the book, were carried out by a couple of individuals. One is a guy named Che Feng. Hunter Biden, in the Hunter Biden emails, refers to him as the super chairman. That's kind of his nickname for him. And he says in one email, I don't believe in the lottery anymore, but I believe in the super chairman. Now, who is Che Feng? He's kind of this sketchy Chinese businessman. His business partner at the time that he was striking deals with Hunter Biden, his business partner was the vice minister at the Ministry for State Security. He was in charge of, among other things, recruiting foreign nationals to spy for China. He was the head of something called the Number 8 Bureau. It doesn't get any higher than that. These are the sorts of individuals that were striking deals with Hunter Biden. In this particular case, Che Feng happened to help a $20 million deal be secured. Another individual that helped arrange that deal is a guy named Mr. Zhao. Mr. Zhao helped with that $20 million deal. He also sent $5 million to Hunter Biden. And he sent that money from a very interesting business called Harvest Global. So you have Mr. Zhao sending $5 million. Who's his business partner, Mark? His business partner is the daughter of the former head of the Ministry of State Security. This is the guy who runs the entire spy apparatus for China. Again, it does not get any higher than that. So what this means, Mark, is that in total, the Biden family got $31 million. They performed no discernible legitimate business activities, as I can find, for that $31 million. And every single deal came from individuals tied at the highest levels to the Chinese intelligence apparatus. So there's no question in my mind that they were targeted by the Chinese. And for the life of me, Mark, this is unprecedented. I don't know of a time in American history where the American first family has had this kind of a financial bond with a foreign intelligence service, particularly a foreign intelligence service that wants to defeat the United States in global competition.
You know, Peter Schweitzer, ironically, the emoluments clause that they used to talk about with Trump has as its purpose to prevent this sort of thing, where somebody who becomes president or other people in the family are basically paid off or invested in, we'll use that phrase, by a foreign government. They had great fear about this sort of thing. And I cannot believe that $31 million, as you write, pours into the Biden family and Joe Biden doesn't know anything about it. He is the head of the Biden clan. That's number one. Number two, they all live very well. Number three, it is amazing how this Democrat Congress doesn't want any of the tax returns of any of the Biden family members. There's been no investigation of any of the Biden family members. He's the current president of the United States. When you consider how they've gone after Donald Trump with these fake issues. Joe Biden directly, how has he benefited from the communist Chinese?
Well, it's a great question, Mark. He directly benefited because the other thing that we lay out in the book is it's very, very clear that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden have had intertwined finances for a very long time. What do I mean by intertwined finances? Well, you know, there are communications where Hunter Biden complains to other family members that he's having to send half his money to Pop, which is his father. But there's also specific examples of him paying his father's bills. Some of them are rudimentary. There's a $320 a month phone bill for a back channel phone that Joe Biden has when he's vice president of the United States. Hunter Biden's paying that. But there's also tens of thousands of dollars of other bills in terms of renovations on Biden family homes, et cetera. So the bottom line is money that Hunter Biden connected overseas directly benefited not only Hunter Biden, but Joe Biden himself and other family members, including James Biden. There's a couple of $1 million of the Chinese money that ends up being sent to James Biden. One other point to make, Mark, which I think is very important and I think lays out the fact that this needs serious investigation, not only by the FBI, but also by Congress with subpoena power. Something very curious happens when Hunter Biden is securing these deals. There's 5 deals we've identified that are linked to Chinese intelligence. Hunter Biden goes to the Secret Service and says, I no longer want protection when I travel overseas. That is a stunning thing that needs to be looked into.
Mm-hmm. He doesn't want records, I guess, where he's going and who he's talking to. Yeah, this is all something that just kind of floats around, and the American media cover it up. They have enormous amount of resources. If they wanted to investigate this, they can raise a lot of questions about it. Congress has subpoena power. The Department of Justice doesn't have to sit on its hands, and yet there it is, sitting on its hands. All the so-called institutions that are there to protect us from this sort of thing seem to be devoured and controlled by the wrong party in this country. So there's Joe Biden with these various connections. There's his family with these various connections. And all we keep hearing about is Donald Trump and his family. They've been investigated by Congress. They've been criminally investigated, which was an outrage. They're still under attack. And there's Joe Biden. $31 million came into this family. It's absolutely appalling. When we come back, Pelosi and Boehner and others on Capitol Hill. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is a fantastic book, Red-Handed. You're going to learn things that you never heard of before, but you're going to start to really understand things. Red-Handed, you can get it at Amazon.com, any retail bookstore. It comes out in a couple of days, but I want to encourage each and every one of you to get it and read it. This is a truly unique book and a unique opportunity to understand, I would argue, Peter Schweitzer, is this subterranean governing that goes on that the American people are utterly unaware of. Subterranean efforts by the Communist Chinese, among others, into our government, into our tech companies, into our colleges and universities. And I suspect this is one of the reasons these same entities hated Donald Trump, because Donald Trump took on the Communist Chinese regime. Donald Trump stood nose to nose with them. Donald Trump imposed tariffs against them and other restrictions against them. And Donald Trump was upsetting the cart here with all these entities that are on the take with the Communist Chinese regime. But I want to get to Congress. We've had Speaker Pelosi. We've had Speaker Boehner. We've had Dianne Feinstein, head of the Intelligence Committee. What have the Communist Chinese, or what have they done with the Communist Chinese?
China's been very successful at what they call elite capture, which is an intelligence term they use, which is they provide deals and benefits to powerful politicians, help make them rich, and those politicians become more friendly towards China. Nancy Pelosi, for example, when she first came into Congress in the early 90s, was actually very anti-communist Chinese. But her position has evolved, and that position has evolved primarily because her husband and her son secured deals in China. Just go back to the Olympics. Remember the previous time that China held the Olympics in Beijing. She initially favored a boycott of those Olympics. But then something curious happened. Her husband was invested in a couple of limousine companies. That was his initial business. They actually got contracts to shuttle VIPs around in Beijing for the Olympics. It was quite a big contract. So she reversed herself. She said she no longer favored a full-out boycott. And the deals have mounted. We reached the point today, Mark, where, to just give you a stark example, there's all this discussion and debate about the origins of the coronavirus. We know that it came from China. Nancy Pelosi has steadfastly refused for 2 years now to even allow a single congressional hearing on the origins of COVID and how it came from China. She has performed other services as well. John Boehner, the Republican, former Speaker of the House, when he was Speaker of the House, blocked legislation that was crucial to China that they wanted passed. It had passed through the Senate on a bipartisan basis. It was going to pass the U.S. House on a bipartisan basis. He refused as Speaker to allow it to even be brought on the floor. When he left the speakership, he joined a lobbying firm in Washington that happens to be the lobbying firm for the Chinese government. They have a contract for the Embassy of China, and their job as a lobbying firm is to provide, in their terms, a political intelligence for issues related to the U.S. defense budget and other issues. So John Boehner is now a strategic advisor to this firm. This firm has offices in China. That office is populated by senior Chinese Communist Party officials and government officials. So he is neck deep in this firm, and is another example of how China works. And it's important to point out here, by the way, Mark, China is not expecting these political figures to, walk with them on every single issue. They have a concept in their intelligence service that loosely translated means big help with a little bad mouth. In other words, as long as you're helping them on the big things that matter to them, if you say something about the Uyghurs or you say something about freedom of speech, they're fine with it. And you find that on Capitol Hill over and over again. Another individual that we profile is Dianne Feinstein, senator from California. She was the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Her husband has done hundreds of millions of dollars of deals in China. In fact, he was invested in a Chinese computer company that sold computers to the U.S. Marine Corps until the Marine Corps discovered they were all bugged. And her husband was a partner with that Chinese firm. So it's a very serious and deep problem on both sides of the aisle.
It's a remarkable book. It is an eye-opening book. It's called Red-Handed by Peter Schweitzer, who is a fantastic author, utterly ignored by the radical left media that fronts for Biden and the Democrat Party. We'll be right back. Come back. This is the book, Red-Handed by Peter Schweitzer. It is a must-read. It is a must-read. And I don't say that lightly, how American elites can get rich helping China win. China is our number one enemy now. China is trying to take over in terms of superpower status. It is threatening the United States, both economically, geopolitically, militarily. And if you want to know what part of the problem is, you got to look within the United States, because we have elements within the United States that have rolled over to this regime, or worse, are now advocates for this regime. And they're all over corporate America. They're all over academia, our politics. And we, the people, know very, very little about this. But thanks to this book, Red-Handed now, I think this will blow the roof off of it. What about the Bush family, Peter Schweitzer? What is the relationship there with the communist regime?
Well, Beijing figured out a while ago that they want relationships not just with individual politicians, they want relationships with families. So I highlight in the book the relationship that Beijing has with the Trudeau family of Canada and with the Bushes. And in both cases, it's multi-generational. In the case of the Bushes, it begins really when George H.W. Bush is the U.S. representative to China. After he leaves that post, and then, of course, becomes vice president of the United States, the relationship there between the Bushes and Beijing grows. Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's brother, starts signing up commercial deals. Those build in the 1990s. Tiananmen Square, of course, the massacre there was just kind of a hiccup as far as the Bush family was concerned. When George W. Bush becomes president of the United States in 2001, Prescott Bush keeps signing up deals, but now Neil Bush, his brother, starts getting deals. He gets a deal with a computer company that is owned by the son of the Chinese premier, paying Neil Bush $1 million a year. No evidence that Neil Bush knows anything about the computer business. So this relationship has continued. Then you flash forward to Jeb Bush when he leaves the Florida governorship. He goes to set up an investment fund. It's got dealings in London, but who's financing it? A lot of the financing is coming from China, where he connects up with a Chinese firm that is part of the Red Aristocracy, a politically connected investment firm. And his investment fund does very, very well, thanks to the help of the Chinese. And in fact, in 2016, when Jeb Bush runs for the president of the United States, there is an organized effort by Chinese nationals linked to the Chinese government to raise money for Jeb Bush. And there's actually the flow of millions of dollars to Jeb Bush's campaign in 2016. So this has been a long, multi-generational relationship. The crescendo, Mark, is that today Neil Bush runs something called the Bush Center that's supposed to deal with U.S.-Chinese relationships. And he goes on Chinese state media talking about how, the human rights situation in Hong Kong is completely understood by people in the West. The rights that people have in Hong Kong are just like the rights they are in the United States. He's become a complete apologist for the Chinese regime. And the previously mentioned Bush Center that I talked about is actually financed in part by United Front groups. United Front groups are groups that are linked to Chinese intelligence designed to push the Chinese agenda overseas. So this is a classic example of how they operate. It has certainly influenced, I think, elements of the Republican Party and how they viewed China. For a long time, they have pushed the line that greater commerce, greater deals with China would moderate China. That has not come to pass. It has only made China stronger. And so people have advocated that position and made money advocating for that position. And the Bush family, unfortunately, is an example of that.
It's almost as if the communist Chinese have not left a single stone unturned in our culture.